Welcome to Chess with Link. Today we're talking about the X-ray attack on the chessboard. I've got a few examples that will hopefully build up your board vision and help you spot these attacks not just in checkmates, but later on in the game. Now, an X-ray is an attack where one of your pieces, let's say this rook sitting up here at b8, threatens through an opponent's piece to an important square or in another important piece. Now, you might be asking, through? How can you threaten through a piece? Only a knight can jump over pieces. It's a way of visualizing our moves. Because if we look at our queen here, that queen has an intersection with that rook here at e8. If our rook could reach e8, it would be checkmate. If our queen could reach e8, it would be checkmate. Assuming, of course, that our opponent's rook on d8 was not there to defend e8. That's a lot of ifs. It's a lot of assumptions. It's a lot of looking forward and strategically assessing your chessboard. We can combine this information into a fatal attack. Because if we move our queen to e8, that compels our opponent to capture, because it would be checkmate if that rook hadn't captured our queen. And now that we have pulled the rook, we've attracted the rook off of d8, well, that board vision, that noticing, that paying attention to the ranks and seeing that our rook is in the same rank as our opponent's king and would be able to checkmate from e8 now becomes relevant, because with our opponent's rook attracted to e8, we can move our rook there and win the game. Let's take a look at a more complicated version that includes a little bit more diagonals. This chessboard includes another two-move checkmate for white. We're going to use those tools we talked about. Do you remember what they are? We're looking at the board, and we're noticing when our piece and an opponent's piece are in the same diagonal, rank, or file. We're also noticing where two or more of our pieces may meet after a long journey. I'm going to give you a couple lines to think about. Our bishop is in the same diagonal as our queen, but there's a pawn in the way. It also has a long journey all the way up to a6 if our pawn wasn't in the way. We don't need to think about that too much because we know that we're thinking about X-rays, and X-rays go through an opponent's piece. But it's still important to notice. Do you see where we might have an X-ray through an opponent's piece yet? Let's look at our other diagonal attacker, the bishop. Now that bishop could attack all the way up to h8 if it wasn't for our opponent's bishop here at d4. We also have an attack on a3. We have an X-ray. Our bishop can go through our opponent's bishop. That line of effect doesn't go all the way up to h8 right now, but it could if the bishop moved. Does that combine with anything else? We have another piece that can move diagonally. The queen has a diagonal attack line with nothing in her way that goes all the way up to c8. It's not an X-ray attack, but it's worth noticing. The queen also can move along the third rank all the way over to a3, or up the H file all the way up to h8. And that's in addition to her moving down the board or moving diagonally down the board. The queen and the bishop's lines intersect at h8. And do you notice what she's pointing at all the way down here at h1? She's got a rook in the same file. And while our queen is in the way, that rook theoretically could get to h8, which also intersects with the bishop. All of that together means that we do have a valid checkmate option here if we sacrifice our queen. Because the queen moves up to h8, gets captured by the bishop. With that bishop moved, we now have bishop to h8 available. And because we were paying attention to those intersections between the X-ray of our bishop and the attacking through our own piece X-ray of our rook, we could take our rook up to h8, which is checkmate. I know that it can be a little bit difficult to look that far ahead. But remember that planning at least 3 moves ahead is often essential to winning a chess game. So looking for these opportunities where you're able to threaten through a piece, and even though it's not actually a threat, even though you're suggesting or noticing a future threat, by paying attention to the future attack lines of your pieces, you can drastically alter the shape of the board. Have you noticed any X-ray attacks on this board? Do we see how our queen not only has immediate threats on our opponent's queen and rook, but also threatens through the c2 queen all the way over to the f2 rook. We also have an attack from our c8 rook all the way up the board to our opponent's c1 rook. And don't forget that we do have a bishop that doesn't have an X-ray attack, but is doing a very nice job containing the king. Is there anything that we could do to ensure that we capture the correct piece first? That we limit our opponent's ability to capture back to only those moves that are beneficial to us? Think about the X-ray. And think of how to compel your opponent to move. How can you force them to move where you want them to? You're going to move the queen first. If we notice that the rook x-rays through the queen on c2 to the rook on c1. And combine that knowledge with the king being trapped behind his own pieces, and our bishop guarding all the way up there to f1. We can start with the x-ray and win the game. Queen captures on c1. That forces your opponent to move their queen to c1, or maybe their rook to f1, but that's a terrible idea. And when they move their queen to c1, we can then capture their queen, which forces them to move rook to f1. And now, with our bishop and our rook both targeting the same square, we can move in for checkmate. Because we looked at how we threatened through an opponent's piece, as well as threatening directly at an opponent's piece. Now, folks, there are lots more X-ray puzzles available to you over there on Lichess. I've just taken you through 3 of the most demonstrative puzzles in a collection that I will link to down below. So please take a little bit of time and try to find the best solution to more of these puzzles. If you're in my OutSchool classes, remember to keep your posts in the classroom as you tell us which moves you made, especially in puzzles 6 and 7, which have multiple possible answers that lead to checkmate. And if you're joining us just over here on the YouTubes, please take a little time and leave a polite reply down below describing your own attacks, again, especially for puzzles 6 and 7, linked to in the collection down below. Because it's brilliant how those puzzles can be solved multiple ways, including by an X-ray. And the entire games that they link to are definitely worth a study. Have a wonderful week, folks, and I hope to see some comments down below or over in the OutSchool classroom, or potentially over there on my website and Patreon, which you can also find linked below. Take care.